When I lived in Japan from 2018 to 2020, I passed the JLPT at the N3 level in July 2019, and then I passed the JLPT at the N2 level in December 2019. So I thought I would give some advice on how I studied for the JLPT N3 and N2. Before I talk about how I studied for the JLPT, I thought it would be a good idea to talk about my background in learning Japanese so you know where I'm coming from. Since I am ethnically Taiwanese, I went to Mandarin school outside of regular school when I was a kid. So I do have an advantage when it comes to learning Japanese kanji. I also took some Japanese language classes at a nearby Japanese cultural center when I was a kid. And after, I did have a personal Japanese tutor for some years. Those Japanese classes that I took when I went to the cultural center was when I was in elementary school. When I reached middle school, I kind of stopped learning Japanese. In high school, I began learning Japanese again. I began by self-studying, and I also volunteered at a local eikaiwa, and I got to practice a lot of conversational Japanese there. When I was in university, before going on the JET program, I just watched a lot of Japanese media like anime, movies, and dramas. When I went to Japan for the JET program after graduating university, I would say my Japanese level was nearing the N3 level. For N3, I used the Nihongo So-Matome series to study. I bought the grammar, vocabulary, and reading comprehension books. I did not buy the kanji and listening comprehension books. For the Nihongo So-Matome series for N3, these books are designed so that you can complete them in 6 weeks. So let's say you're studying grammar. For each week, 6 days of those weeks, you will learn several grammar points every day. And after learning, there will be some practice questions. On the 7th day of the week, there will be a review test to help you. I really liked using the Nihongo So-Matome series. It's really well organized and easy to understand and study from. It's also important to know that you should not just only rely on the reading comprehension book for N3. You should also try to read as much Japanese as you can outside of studying these books. So other things that I did to study for the N3 were reading manga and watching Japanese media. At school, I would try to listen to the Japanese being spoken around me and try to see if I could understand. I would also talk to my colleagues in Japanese. So some manga that I read included Natsume Yujincho and Honey Lemon Soda. And also at school, when notices were being passed on everyone's desk, I would try to read those and try to learn the kanji from them. For Japanese media, I used a lot of Netflix. Mainly in the beginning, I started off with Terrace House. I would use English subtitles and then slowly transition into Japanese subtitles. After watching Terrace House with Japanese subtitles, I began to watch Japanese anime, movies, and dramas, all with Japanese subtitles. On the day before N3, I would go to YouTube and look up a listening comprehension practice test, and I would do that just to familiarize myself with the format. So whenever I had free time to study, let's say an hour to study, I would try to first start with the grammar book, try to finish 1 day of the grammar, and then 1 day of the vocabulary, and then 1 day of the reading comprehension. So I would go through that order, and after finishing those 3 books for that day, I would then try to read some manga. Sometimes when you read manga, there are some things that come up in the manga that you just previously studied in Nihongo So-Matome, and that will be a great way to reinforce the material that you studied from those books. And as I said, I would also watch Japanese anime, movies, and dramas. So here's a breakdown of what I scored on the N3. For language knowledge, I got 49 out of 60. For reading, I got 46 out of 60. And for listening, I got 57 out of 60 for a total of 152 out of 180. Before I talk about how I studied for the N2, I thought it would be a good idea to emphasize the importance of studying kanji. Even now with all the technology, there's more emphasis on the recognition of kanji. I still do personally believe that learning how to write kanji, learning the stroke order, is very important. I learned stroke order when I was learning Mandarin as a kid, and whenever I see a kanji that I don't know, I can still write it because I know the rules of stroke order. This will come in handy, as I will explain a little bit more later. There's an app that I highly recommend for searching up kanji. It's called Imiwa, which translates to what's the meaning. So this app is not only great for showing you the meaning of kanji, it also shows you the stroke order. So for example, let's search up the kanji for big. And then if you press here, it will show you how to write it. This app has been extremely useful for me. Whenever I'm at a store, I'm reading manga, I'm watching something, and there's a kanji that appears that I don't know the meaning of, I immediately pull up my phone, I open this app, and then I search up the kanji, and then I can find the meaning really fast. So earlier I said that learning stroke order would come in handy. So for example, let's say I'm in a store and I see this kanji that I have no idea. For example, let's say I see denki and I don't know what that means. I could just pull up the app, I could write it out, and then I could find it, and it's right here. So what I'm using right here is the traditional Chinese handwriting keyboard. So for me, using this traditional Chinese handwriting keyboard, I could find out the meaning of a lot of kanji that I don't know. So I do want to know that in Japanese kanji, they use both simplified and traditional Chinese characters. So if you're using this traditional Chinese handwriting keyboard, sometimes you may not find some of the simplified characters that Japanese kanji uses. When I made the transition to Japanese subtitles on Terrace House, I would take about 2 hours just to watch one episode. Every time a kanji came up that I didn't know the meaning of, I would pause, pull out my phone, and I would search up the kanji on Imiwa. Although it doubled the amount of time that it took for me to watch one episode of Terrace House, in the long run I would learn more and more kanji, and then I would end up using the app less. I did the same with Japanese anime, movies, and dramas, and I got to a point where I didn't need to use the app as much. For N2, I used Nihongo So-Matome again. I used the grammar, the kanji, the vocabulary, and the reading comprehension books. I also used the new Kanzen Master JLPT N2 workbook. For the Nihongo So-Matome, for N2, you complete these books over 8 weeks instead of the N3 books where you do it over 6 weeks. That's just probably because there's more material to cover. So the new Kanzen Master JLPT N2 workbook is a great resource not only for studying for the JLPT, but also learning words for everyday life. So when I studied, I did something similar. When I studied for the N3, I would go through the grammar book, and then the kanji book, and then the vocabulary book, and then the reading comprehension book. After that, I would read some manga or novels, and then I would do the same, watch Japanese media with Japanese subtitles. Just studying the reading comprehension N2 Nihongo So-Matome book is not enough for the reading section. In order to be prepared for the N2 reading section, I increased the difficulty of what I read. So as I just mentioned, I still did read manga, but I also read novels such as Kimi no Na wa, Tenki no Ko, and Violet Evergarden. So even though reading novels is actually quite difficult, it really helped me prepare for the reading section of the N2. I heard that many people ran out of time for the reading section on the N2, but for me, I had enough time. For the JLPT N2 workbook, I would study here and there whenever I had time. There were many times where I'd work through the Nihongo So-Matome books, and then I would read a novel such as Violet Evergarden, and while I am reading, I would find some grammar points in Violet Evergarden that I just learned from Nihongo So-Matome. So it was a great way when I was reading to kind of reinforce what I just learned. For listening, I did the same thing I did for N3. On the day before the N2 test, I would go on YouTube and find a listening comprehension practice test and just do it just to familiarize myself with the format. So here's the breakdown of what I scored on the N2. For language knowledge, I scored 47 out of 60. For reading, I scored 36 out of 60. And for listening, I scored 58 out of 60 for a total score of 141 out of 180. So that's all I have to say about how I studied for the N3 and N2. Hopefully some of the advice that I gave in this video is helpful to you. I think a lot of it comes down to seeking as many opportunities as you can to practice and study Japanese, and also dedication is very important. So thank you for watching.